Right. Well, what is the name of this place where you can follow the talk of someone that you were reading his research when you were a graduate student? Where in the audience you have teachers of yours when you were doing your PhD and colleagues, and also you see other heroes of you being in the audience. Well, this place is called the Academy. So thank you very much for being here. And it's truly an honor for me actually to speak in the Academy, and especially following up Dr. Newell. So my research actually, I probably can say it's a spin-off of the things that actually Dr. Newell, several giants like him actually started way before me. So my focus is on human movement variability. So this is very simple actually. When we are talking about variability, we are talking about movement that it doesn't repeat itself, repetition without repetition. So for example, tonight, if you feel like energetic and you decide to have a cold one, and then you say like, okay, well, let's play a game of darts. You're not gonna be able to hit always bullseye. If you will, let me know and I will be your manager, okay? But you're not gonna be able to do that. The same thing holds true when you walk. Every step that you make is different from the previous one, okay? And from that perspective, there is a gazillion of different questions that you can ask about this variability, where it comes from, okay? My spinal cord, my cerebellum, okay? How does it relate with, with disease, okay? How does it relate with learning a motor skill? How does it relate with a movement being stable or not, okay? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a gazillion of different questions that we can ask. And because of this, actually, we developed recently a center for research in human movement variability in the University of Nebraska, Omaha. And we actually have, we explore actually this specific question. The theme is variability, and we explore variability in a variety of motor-related disorders like autism, like peripheral arterial disease, like stroke, like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and this is the young faculty in this specific center. Now, if you will just come over to my university and you will ask these very talented undergraduates that we have there, how do you study variability? They will probably tell you standard deviations and coefficient of variations. This is how we're gonna study it. Okay, well, is this correct? Well, there are some problems, okay? As I was taught when I was doing statistics, okay, from Ma, okay, since I had here in one of my statistics courses, statistics, when we learn in school, they have some fine print, okay? It's kind of like the credit cards, okay? The fine print is assumptions, okay? And some of these assumptions, they talk to us about the importance so that the data will have to be randomly, will have to be random, will have to be independent of each other, okay? In order for them to go into this beautiful belly-shaped curve that we are dealing with, okay? Well, what about if actually we will think of feedback, especially when we are dealing with variability, okay? Well, is it one step that you make independent from the previous one? Okay, think a little bit about this. Is one step that you make completely random and unrelated from the previous one? Okay, think also about that, okay? Well, if you will start thinking from that perspective, you also start thinking as well too that there may be actually two different components of variability as well too. We could consider variability about how much movement we have. So for example, okay, how much we have actually movement away from a central point, okay, the mean, okay, and that will be amount of variability, okay. But also we could start actually thinking of variability as actually independent from this randomness, okay, the existence of randomness, and start looking if it is randomness or not. Okay, when we are looking continuous, for example, strides or continuous actually, or tasks that they happen continuously, okay? And then we can also talk about structural variability or temporal structural variability. So just to give you an example with these things, always I like to use visual examples. This is two different data sets, and they have the same mean and the same standard deviation. Well, what about with our statistics, we will actually find no significant differences, game over, okay? Well, what about if I will tell you that the first data set comes from this and the second data set comes from that? And if we are talking about two different control processes, will that be important? Well, absolutely, okay? All right? So from that perspective, you will need different types of tools to look at this temporal structure, how things evolve over time, how things change over time. So this is again 3 different signals. They're again plotted with the same actually like range, and actually they have the same standard deviation. But if you will use like tools like entropy, approximate entropy, likely upon of exponent, like correlation dimension, you can get actually different values between them, and then you can start describing what Dr. Newell called regularity a little bit earlier. You can start describing this temporal structure, how things change over time. Now, a lot of people, I was even a talk like this summer, consider that this variability is actually is noise in the system. The same way that when you drive to work and you're trying to listen to the crystal voice of Christina Aguilera, okay, on the radio, and you just mess around with your dial, you're trying to get that noise off, okay? The same way actually is with movement. We're trying to get rid of that noise over that beautiful voice of Christina Aguilera, okay? That's what a lot of people thought and still think, okay? But there has been developments, okay, in different fields, one of them being cardiology, okay? I like this because my brother is a cardiologist, okay? Like for example in cardiology, who they have looked actually QRS waves, successive QRS waves, and they found out that actually that is not the case, okay, when we look at them temporally, and actually could be described mathematically with mathematical chaos or fractals, okay? And they actually said that if this is just random, okay, or it's periodic, if every QRS wave before the previous one is actually the same, if the distance between them is exactly the same, that's actually not good for you. And they developed actually a definition to describe this, which we call complexity, and we just heard about complexity from Dr. Newell. But this is the definition that has been used from a cardiological perspective, as complexity is defined as highly variable fluctuations in physiological processes resembling mathematical chaos. I like this definition. I'm going to use this definition, okay? All right. Now, since that time, that type of complexity, which is actually associated with health, has been found in other actually biorhythms, both by my group and by other groups as well too. Now someone actually in the audience might say to me like, well Nick, you just threw this chaos in there. Can you give me a picture of it? Absolutely. Okay, let's look at a picture of this. This is a sine wave, okay? If we will plot it practically versus its velocity, okay, we're gonna get something like that. This is chaos. Looks a lot like this, but if you will plot it versus velocity, you'll get like something like that, like a butterfly. You have something like this, you plot versus velocity, you get like actually this. This is random, this is completely periodic, and this is something highly complex. So imagine, for example, that when you walk, okay, maybe you have something like this and this associated with health. Well, if somehow your gait becomes like this or like this, okay, that is actually bad for you, okay? Now, based on this, we developed actually a theoretical model which actually says that optimal variability in terms of your human movement, actually there is an optimal movement which is associated with health in terms of your movements. And this variability also has form, okay? If you will actually deviate from this optimal variability, okay, you could become very rigid and less adaptable to different perturbations. So you become like robotic. Danger, 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 okay? Okay? You become very robotic, okay? We see that, for example, in individuals like when they have actually ACL deficiency, okay? Or you can become very noisy and unstable. Let's look at a frail older adult, for example, how unstable this person is, all over the place, okay? A drunken kinesiologist, for example, okay, could be like that too, okay? All right? But what will be a stable behavior? A stable behavior will be one that has high complexity. And again, our definition of complexity is that it will represent something like chaos and fractals. Now, this actually, it is kind of like a safe assumption, especially if we will consider that inside of us, things represent chaos, okay, and fractals a lot. And when we look at nature, we see this a lot as well too, okay? Why we should be different, for crying out loud, okay? When we move, okay? So with this, we toyed with this schematic as well too, who looks like very similar to the one that actually like Dr. Newell presented from that book in 2006 from Dr. West. Okay, the same year we actually proposed this, that complexity here, higher complexity, you're healthy, lower complexity, you're not healthy. Okay, predictability, if you're highly predictable, you're a robot. If you have very little predictability, you're very noisy, both of these situations not good. Somewhere in between, again, is health. Okay? Now, with this actually theoretical model, we have a map to start with experiments. Okay? Because when I was a doctoral student, I remember Dr. Esther Fellon told me, if you don't have a theory, okay, you're not a scientist. But Nick, do remember that 99% of theories, they go into the garbage can. Okay? She didn't mention that to me. Okay? Now, we did advance this theory recently by saying that this actually might actually be true not only, let's say, for example, your gait, but it actually could go across different scales. Okay? And the fact that you could become more dexterous, for example, it could be like because you have actually more complexity, more variability across different time scales in your system, who they are actually linked with nonlinear coupling. Okay? But we will mention about this a little bit later as well too. Okay, now, all right, so now we have our model. Let's look at what we've done with aging, since you're all excited about that. Okay, all right. So now other people have done a lot of work in this, of course. Okay, and so for example, even at Pittsburgh, for example, they've done some work. I'm just joking. Dr. Newman was mentioning about this yesterday. They've done a lot of work. So for example, we know from different people that actually amount of gait variability is very close associated with falls. Okay? And they've been like studies by Hausdorff, Mackey, and Brack, where they saw that amount of gait variability is a very important indicator, okay, of mobility in falls. Okay? Amount meaning standard deviation, coefficient of variations. Okay? Now, what about temporal structure variability? Okay? Well, with respect to temporal structure, a couple of things that we know also as well too, is that actually old folks, they become more noisy. So here we see like some measures, okay, of actually of temporal structure. And this is actually just kind of like people walking, okay? And you see, this is old folks, this is Parkinson folks, okay? Parkinson, I've heard someone actually describing it as aging in steroids, okay? All right, so this will be Parkinson, this will be old folks, this will be young folks. You see actually how much more variable, but actually more noisy it becomes. And that's actually what you see as well there too. Okay, so this is the young, this is the old, and this is actually the Parkinson patients. So they become way much more noisy, okay? They're into this frail kind of like being the extreme, actually all over the place, they become more noisy. So then what we want to do is practically, we want to bring them down. We want to bring this down, actually, in terms of both the amount of variability and both actually the temporal structure. But how are we going to do that? Okay? How can we attack these problems? So we found some serendipitous results with dual tasking studies that we did. We wanted to see, for example, when you do a dual task, actually what will happen. We were expecting, actually, that things will go worse. But interestingly, actually, in our dual tasking research, we found out, okay, that actually, this is the old folks, okay, with gray. This is the young folks, okay. When you do actually a dual task, actually variability drops down, both in terms of the standard deviations and the coefficient of variations, both of the Lyapunov exponent, okay, which is actually, again, a measure of complexity, of temporal structure. So in other words, okay, if we want to bring down those bars that we saw them high in terms of the old folks, we want to bring them down where the young are, dual tasking, someone might say, well, GNIC could be used for rehabilitation purposes, okay? Possibly, okay? All right, now, in that realm, actually, we start thinking about like, well, if I'm working and I'm doing something secondary, okay, maybe in terms of like receiving some type of like input from the periphery, maybe things actually is what is really affecting you. So we start messing around both with cognitive loading, visual input, et cetera, et cetera. So we've done a lot of research in terms of virtual reality. And Amy is playing like different clips for you just to see all kind of crazy things that we can do with our VR system, okay? But one very serendipitous results that we had is when we had people actually walk with and without a weight, okay, on a treadmill. And if you look at actually a bunch of their steps, this is 200 steps, so this is 10 time. If I have a weight on one side, I actually have that type of gait, okay? I gave myself a stroke, okay, all right? I just got a weight, okay? So you see, stance time in between the two legs practically is completely different. If I will expose you in VR, this is what will happen, okay? Isn't that amazing? Okay, that is truly amazing, okay? It almost overrides practically some of the sensory information by being exposed to VR. This is truly fantastic, okay? So then we start thinking, well, maybe actually by incorporating input from the periphery like that, maybe we can actually change those bars, okay, that we're just like talking about, and decrease that. So we start messing around with different ways of input. Thank you. One will be vibrations, okay, some of the sensory input. Another one will be virtual reality, okay? And this is a couple of the things that we've done. Well, first of all, with vibrations, one of the ways is, okay, to provide vibrations into the system, okay? And people have done this, actually, with old folks being exposed in vibrations, okay, and Parkinson's patients being exposed with vibration via insults. But what happens is, yes, variability decreases, okay, but as soon as you take this off, that doesn't stick with you, okay? And we actually did even a clinical trial vibrating babies, okay, for a different purpose actually, okay, to see if we can improve their sitting posture, and we found no long-term effects, okay, even though we vibrated them for months. Okay? Yeah, I do crazy things. Okay, all right, that's what my wife says to me. Okay, well, what about if you will actually change the visual input as well too? Now, people have done that as well too, okay, especially with Parkinson's patients. So what they've done, they projected actually lines on the ground to see what's going to happen with that. Again, that actually has an effect, okay? Variability decreases, but you become very robotic. Every step that you make is actually exactly the same with the previous one. Well, we don't want that. We don't want to be robotic as well too, okay? So, and the same thing happens actually with metronomes. So what may be the question? Well, maybe we can fit fractals into the system. So, now someone might say to me like, well, Nick, really? We're going to fit fractals into the system? We're going to fit chaos into the system? Well, if this is what's going to give you health, well, what about if you will do that as well too? So we took old folks again, and what we did, we measured their cadence, and then we took music, and we made the music to be based on their cadence. So you have to you step on the notes practically, okay? All right, but the notes are coming to you in a variable way, okay? So it's a variable music metronome, okay? So Amy is going to be a TJ. It's going to play you some music, okay? So this is few release with a metronome. So every beat comes exactly the same as the previous beat, okay? All right. So imagine you're trying to walk on that, okay? It's a very fast cadence, though, okay? Amy, just stop this one and start the next one. You got to stop the first one. All right, fantastic. It become very musical.
He's not a very good DJ.
Say what again?
Said I'm not a good DJ.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
Use the mouth.
Yeah, we'll keep you here. We're not gonna sing it to the clubs.
Good.
All right. Well, anyway, you get the drift. If Amy is, oh, here we are. Okay. All right. All right. This is chaos now. Now you see how the beats actually, they speed up and then they slow down, okay? So this is actually working with a variable music metronome, all right? Being capable actually of changing this, okay? And we can do the same with noise, where actually the beats will be all over the place, okay? Now someone might say, why did you dress it with music? Well, because we like music, okay? It's completely different if you just follow a metronome, if you follow a metronome with music, and there's actually research about this. Now, the results actually, they show something like this, okay? So actually the study shows like great feasibility, okay? This is all folks, okay? So this is step width, stride interval, stride length, okay? And they shows actually, this is actually the old folks, this is the actual values, okay? Fractals make them much, much closer to healthy control sys. Healthy control sys about yay, okay? All right, and this is actually, right here is metronomes, just purely periodic. And this is also like And this is also like noise. So it's kind of like verifies that model that we were talking to you about. So actually, the old folks, they can follow this, and they actually, by working on these metronomes, we can actually replicate this, okay? Now, replicating is great, feasibility is great, so, but the question, the true question is, will that can help old folks? Will that actually can help people who they have problems like that? Are we going to have any type of retention and transfer with this? Are we going to have any neuroplasticity with respect to that, having people walk with these fractal metronomes? I don't know. But maybe the NIH will give me money to find out. Okay. Now, however, is like by changing the cues actually, practically what I can change, what I'm hoping to change is organization of the human movement system, and not just simply induce movement repetitions. And not only that, but we are actually proposing by using an adaptive complex type of metronome, where we are actually like looking not only fractals in terms of what is going on with just continuous beats, okay, but actually taking the beats and fractally challenge them as groups in different time scales as well too, okay. Now with this, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank my funding sources. This is actually all the people that they work actually in this building that I'm directing, and this is me back there. Okay. All right, thank you very much.